All right. So let's take a look at all these reports and briefings you've sent over. Looks like we're going deep on global security this time, huh? Lots on the UN and ASEAN, especially their changing roles in this whole thing.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack here.
We've got some in-depth stuff from the Security Council, some interesting commentaries on ASEAN's strategies, all kinds of stuff on those shifting power dynamics within the UN. Ready to dive in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this report, UNGA 4413, it really jumps out how much the Security Council's kind of moved away from those classic tools, like peacekeeping and sanctions.
Yeah, it's a pretty striking trend.
Like the last peacekeeping operation, that was way back in 2014, a whole decade ago.
Right. And new sanctions regimes, those have slowed down a lot. Even adding names or criteria to existing ones is getting tougher and tougher.
Huh. So does that mean the Security Council's like losing its power or something?
I wouldn't say losing power, but maybe it's a recognition that those tools, they're not always the best fit for today's world. Things are so complex now. What's interesting is how the General Assembly is kind of stepping up to fill the gap.
Yeah, the report mentioned the General Assembly getting more involved in peace and security. What's that look like in practice?
We'll take the Veto Initiative they started using in 2022. Basically, if the Security Council vetoes something, the General Assembly can call a meeting, look at it again.
So it doesn't actually overturn the veto.
Right, it doesn't. But it shines a spotlight on the issue, puts on the political pressure.
Okay, so it's kind of a check and balance within the UN system itself.
Exactly. And it could signal a shift in the power balance, with the General Assembly getting a bigger say in global security.
Definitely something to watch. Now let's switch gears to ASEAN. ASEAN Commentary Special Edition 2024. These have some really thought-provoking stuff on how ASEAN's adapting.
Yeah, there's a big focus on two things, connectivity and resilience, especially under Lao PDR's chairmanship this year.
Connectivity, what does that mean in this context? It sounds like more than just roads and bridges.
Oh, for sure. It's multifaceted. So they're talking about improving infrastructure within ASEAN to facilitate trade and movement, but also digital connectivity, collaboration in education, science and tech, cultural exchange, the whole nine yards.
So building up those internal connections to create a stronger, more resilient ASEAN community. What about resilience?
The idea there is that a more unified, connected ASEAN is better equipped to withstand external pressures, economic, political, security threats, all of it. They're looking to boost ASEAN's clout on the world stage.
It's a very practical approach, isn't it? Recognizing how the world's changing and that ASEAN needs to adapt.
Exactly. It's about looking both inward and outward, focusing on internal cohesion while also positioning ASEAN strategically in the global context.
Okay, let's get into some specifics from the Security Council reports now. UNSC15796 and UNSC15813. First up, Somalia, a place with, well, decades of security challenges.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. The mandate for the UN assistance mission in Somalia, UNSOM, it expires on October 31st. The Security Council is deciding whether to renew it, and if so, what it should actually do.
Big moment for Somalia's future, then. What factors do they need to consider?
Well, al-Shabaab's still a major threat, and there are still concerns about the Somali government's ability to, actually govern and provide security for its people. The council needs to figure out the scope of any future mission, how to support the government, but also give it the means to deal with those security threats.
Funding's always a key issue with these missions, too.
Absolutely. The UN's had trouble getting enough resources for its Somalia missions in the past. They need to make sure any new mission has the financial backing to succeed. Otherwise, it's setting it up to fail.
Beyond the practical stuff, what are the bigger goals here? What should these missions be working towards?
The ultimate goal is a peaceful, stable Somalia, a Somalia that's prosperous, too. That means helping the government build effective institutions, promoting good governance, fostering economic development, and all while addressing the underlying causes of the conflict, which are often really deep-rooted.
It's a long road, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it needs commitment from everyone involved.
It does. Somalia's been dealing with conflict for so long, lasting peace. That takes a coordinated, sustained effort from both the Somali people and the international community.
All right, the other Security Council report, UNSC 15813, that one's about Western Sahara, another region stuck in a long territorial dispute.
This report's all about those informal talks that Staffan de Mistura, the Secretary General's personal envoy for Western Sahara, he's been facilitating. They're trying to break the political stalemate, find some common ground to move the peace process forward.
It's good that at least they're talking. What are the main things holding back a resolution in Western Sahara, though?
The core issue is self-determination for the Sahrawi people. The Polisario Front, representing the Sahrawis, they've been pushing for an independence referendum for years. But Morocco, they say the territory is part of their kingdom, and their solution is autonomy. Bridging that gap, it's a huge challenge.
Yeah, classic territorial dispute. Both sides dug in deep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To find a solution that's fair and works for everyone, you're going to need a lot of political will and some seriously creative diplomacy. It's a situation that needs very careful handling and a real understanding of all the history and politics involved.
It's fascinating, isn't it? These long-standing disputes, how they get so intertwined with global politics. But we're going to have to take a break there for now.
Yeah, definitely more to discuss. So, picking up where we left off, there's some really pressing issues on the Security Council's agenda.
Right, like a whole bunch of things demanding their attention right now.
Definitely. And we were talking about Somalia, how that situation's at a critical point.
Yeah, with the UNSC mandate expiring at the end of October, big decisions to make.
Huge decisions. And on top of that, there's the whole question of what comes after the African Union's mission there, ATMIS.
Right, ATMIS, another layer to this whole thing.
Exactly. The Secretary General, he's supposed to give an update on the design and funding for a possible successor mission by October 11th. Then the Council gets to hash it out.
So many moving parts. When the Council's looking at Somalia, making these decisions, what are the key things they have to think about?
Well, first off, gotta assess the security situation right. Al-Shabaab's still a big threat, and there are concerns about the Somali government, whether they can actually govern effectively, provide security for people.
So whatever UN mission they come up with, they've got to get the mandate right. Enough support for the government, but also it's got to be able to tackle those security threats head on.
Totally. Finding that balance is tricky. And then there's the whole funding issue.
Right, that always comes up.
Always. The UN, they haven't always had it easy getting the resources they need for their Somalia missions. Whatever they decide on, it has to have the financial backing to work. Or else, well, it's doomed to fail.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Can't really expect much if they don't have the resources, right?
Yeah.
But okay, besides the practical stuff, what's the bigger picture here? What should the goals be for these missions in Somalia?
The end goal, ideally, is a Somalia that's peaceful, stable, prosperous. So that means helping the government build strong institutions, promoting good governance, helping their economy develop. But it also means tackling the root causes of the conflict. And those are often, well, they're messy and deeply entrenched.
It's a long-term project, isn't it? And a lot of commitment from everyone involved.
For sure. Somalia's been dealing with conflict for decades. To get lasting peace, it takes a joint effort, sustained effort, from the Somalis and the international community.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about the Western Sahara. That was the other Security Council report. And Resolution 2703 from October last year that renewed the mandate for MONUSCO, the UN mission there. What are the chances of actually making some progress on the political side of things?
Well, that resolution mentions the informal talks led by Staffan de Mistura, the Secretary General's personal envoy. They had those meetings earlier this year in New York, trying to get past the deadlock, find some formulas that everyone can agree on, and hopefully move the peace process along.
Dialogue is good, right? At least it's something.
It's a start, for sure. But in Western Sahara, there are some big obstacles.
Like what?
Well, the main issue is self-determination for the Sahrawi people. The Polisario Front, who represent them, they want a referendum on independence. Been advocating for that a long time. But then you have Morocco, who says the territory is part of their kingdom, and they're offering autonomy as the solution. Getting those two sides to see eye to eye, it's incredibly tough.
Sounds familiar, kind of like what we were talking about with Somalia. Another territorial dispute, long history, everyone entrenched in their positions.
Yeah, exactly. Finding a solution that's fair and that everyone buys into, it's going to take a lot of political willpower and a whole lot of creativity on the diplomatic front.
Okay, let's pull back for a moment and look at some of the insights from the ASEAN commentaries. They're all about ASEAN's theme for this year, enhancing connectivity and resilience. What are some of the big takeaways there?
Well, there are a lot of different voices in those commentaries, experts, officials, all with their own perspectives on how ASEAN can navigate this, well, this increasingly complicated regional and global landscape. But a big theme that comes up over and over is the need to strengthen those internal connections within ASEAN.
Internal connections, interesting. What does that actually mean in practice?
So they're talking about better physical infrastructure, transportation networks, communication, that sort of thing, making it easier to move people and goods within ASEAN. And then there's digital connectivity, too, and more collaboration in areas like education, science and tech, cultural exchanges.
So building a more tightly knit ASEAN community, one that's more resilient too.
Exactly. The argument is that by strengthening those internal bonds, ASEAN countries not only benefit economically, but they're also better able to withstand external pressures.
Kind of like banding together, using collective strength to deal with all the uncertainty in the world.
Right. But the commentaries also acknowledge that there are some serious challenges to actually making this happen.
What sorts of challenges?
One that keeps popping up is the need for a more, I guess you could say, robust institutional framework for ASEAN. The argument is that the current mechanisms they have for making decisions, resolving conflicts, dealing with crises, they might not be enough to handle the increasingly complex issues facing the region.
It's like what we talked about with the UN Security Council. For any international organization to work, it needs strong institutions. Institutions that can facilitate cooperation, manage disagreements, respond effectively when crises hit.
Absolutely. And the commentaries offer some concrete ideas on how to strengthen ASEAN's institutional capacity.
Like what?
Well, one suggestion is to beef up the role of the ASEAN Secretariat, give it more resources, more authority to coordinate regional initiatives, and make sure those ASEAN agreements are actually implemented.
A more empowered secretariat, that makes sense. Could help streamline decision-making, maybe make the whole organization more agile.
Exactly. Another suggestion is to improve the mechanisms for conflict resolution, dispute settlement, that sort of thing.
Especially with those South China Sea tensions. Potential for things to escalate there.
For sure. And the commentaries really hammer home the importance of trust building among ASEAN member states, better understanding. That's the foundation for cooperation and collective action.
Right. Strong institutions need that foundation. Shared values, mutual respect, commitment to working together. But it's not just about internal stuff, right? The commentaries talk about ASEAN's relations with external powers, too.
Yes, boosting ASEAN's collective bargaining power, that's a key theme.
Makes sense, but maintain that centrality in the regional architecture. How do they propose to do that?
One strategy is to focus on economic integration within ASEAN, more trade and investment among member states, make the region more attractive to foreign investment and less dependent on external partners.
So a more self-reliant, resilient ASEAN economy, one that can handle those outside pressures.
Right. And the commentaries also emphasize the need for ASEAN to speak with one voice on the big issues, regional and global.
If you want influence on the world stage, that's crucial. A united front, that's how you get your interests and values across.
Exactly. And they argue that ASEAN's voice, it should be based on those core principles: consensus building, non-interference, peaceful resolution of disputes.
Using ASEAN's unique identity, its diplomatic style, to promote stability and cooperation in the region and beyond.
Now, there's one commentary that goes into the ASEAN-Australia relationship specifically. It talks about the 2024 Special Summit, what came out of it, and what's next.
Right. That summit was a big deal, marking 50 years since Australia became ASEAN's first dialogue partner. So what did they accomplish?
It was mainly about reaffirming that strong partnership, outlining future cooperation, trade, investment, security, climate change, people-to-people exchanges. They came up with some concrete initiatives, too, including a new plan of action to make that comprehensive strategic partnership between ASEAN and Australia a reality.
Sounds like it was a productive summit. Good for ASEAN-Australia relations.
Definitely. And that commentary highlights how important this partnership is, especially for tackling shared challenges and promoting peace, stability, prosperity in the Indo-Pacific.
Now, one of the commentaries brings up a point we haven't really touched on yet. It argues that ASEAN needs a better institutional framework, one that's actually implementable, to deal with internal disagreements among member states and even crises within those countries.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. ASEAN's principle of non-interference, it's sometimes made it hard to effectively deal with situations where a domestic crisis spills over into regional affairs.
It's a tough line to walk, respecting national sovereignty while also trying to keep things stable regionally.
Absolutely. The commentary suggests that maybe ASEAN could find ways to do more preventive diplomacy, conflict mediation within member states, while still sticking to those core principles.
It's an interesting idea. Maybe by strengthening early warning mechanisms, developing better tools for dialogue and mediation, ASEAN could be more proactive, preventing and resolving internal conflicts before they blow up into regional crises.
Definitely something worth exploring further. Okay, let's switch gears again, move from the political side of things to the economic landscape. We've been talking about shifting power dynamics, ASEAN's focus on connectivity and resilience, but how does all of that connect to the broader economic forces at play?
That's a great question. I mean, economics and security, They're often intertwined, aren't they? Like
Yeah.
when an economy is unstable or there's a lot of inequality, that can create the perfect conditions for conflict.
Yeah, it's a crucial link, and people don't always see it. When people feel like they're being left behind economically, that breeds resentment, instability. It can even lead to violence.
So to really grasp what's happening with global security, you have to understand these economic undercurrents.
Absolutely. And speaking of the bigger picture, we've got these reports that give us a broader view of global trends and challenges.
The EAP update, October 2024. The one that paints kind of mixed picture for East Asia and the Pacific.
Right, that's the one. So they're predicting slower economic growth for the region, although it's still expected to be faster than the rest of the world. And a big part of that is China. Their projected growth is moderating, which is going to have a knock-on effect throughout the region.
China's economic influence is huge, obviously.
Hmm.
But the report also says those East Asia and Pacific countries need to find their own ways to grow, not just rely on China.
Yeah, exactly. If you depend too much on one economic powerhouse, even one as big as China, you're vulnerable. The report stresses diversification, investing in areas that will create sustainable growth over the long haul.
Building resilience, not just to economic shocks from outside, but also to those long-term shifts as China's role in the global economy changes.
Right. And on that note, the report talks about how China's demand for imports is actually growing. And that's been good news for a lot of developing economies in the region.
Wait, how does that work? How can China importing more stuff help other countries' economies?
Think about it as China needs more goods and services. The countries that can provide those things, they benefit. If you can adapt quickly, supply what China needs, you're in a good position to capitalize on that increased trade.
So it's a balancing act, right? On the one hand, you don't want to become too reliant on China. On the other, you can leverage that demand to boost your own growth.
Exactly. And the report emphasizes strategic planning, smart investments, making the most of the opportunities while minimizing the risks.
Okay, one more thing from the report, something that's been getting a lot of attention lately. Artificial intelligence, or AI, and what it means for jobs. What's the report's take on that?
It highlights how AI can impact the workforce in two ways, kind of a double-edged sword. So yeah, some tasks can be automated, which could lead to job losses in certain sectors. But at the same time, AI can create whole new jobs, even make existing jobs better by, augmenting human capabilities.
So it's more complicated than just saying AI equals job losses.
Way more complicated. It's a much more nuanced picture. The challenge for these countries in East Asia and the Pacific, and really for everyone globally, is adapting to these changes, preparing their workforces for this future where AI plays a bigger and bigger role.
Which means education and training are more important than ever.
Couldn't agree more. Investing in STEM education, digital skills training, lifelong learning, that's key to making sure workers have the skills they need to thrive in this new economy.
It's not just about the tech itself. It's about making sure everyone has the chance to benefit from these changes, creating a supportive environment.
Exactly. It's got to be a holistic approach, investing in technology, but also having social policies that promote equity and opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up, I do want to touch on one more report you shared, the SGAP 2024 FS Social Outlook Asia Pacific. This one really drives home the importance of social protection, especially if we want a future that's more resilient, inclusive, and equitable.
It feels especially relevant given everything we've been talking about, all these economic shifts, technological disruptions. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture and forget about the impact on people.
Yeah, for sure. The report talks about how vulnerable the Asia-Pacific region is to climate change, how millions of people are affected by disasters every year. Strong social protection systems, they can act as a safety net during those crises, keeping people from falling into poverty, preventing inequality from getting even worse.
So it's about more than just a safety net. It's about using social protection to promote sustainable development, right?
Right. Investing in people, making sure they have the support they need to weather those challenges and contribute to their communities. The report argues for comprehensive systems, ones that address all kinds of risks and vulnerabilities throughout a person's life, from childhood to old age.
It's a powerful message, really. Investing in human security, that's the foundation for a better future.
I agree.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, huh? From those global power shifts to how regions are adapting, and then zooming in on the human side of all these economic trends. Quite a journey.
It has been. We've really delved into this evolving global security landscape, and I think one thing's clear. We need to be adaptable, we need to innovate, and most importantly, we need to work together.
Couldn't said it better myself.
Yeah.
These challenges, they demand a global response, and understanding how everything's connected, that's the first step to finding solutions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Hope you found it insightful.
My pleasure.